Something happened last night that your soulmate never expected to experience. It was one of those nights when everything seemed unusually quiet, when the world outside appeared to slow down for a moment, as though time itself had stepped aside and allowed something important to happen. Your soulmate was sitting beside a woman who knew that her time was becoming very short. She was tired. Her voice was soft. Her words came slowly, with long pauses between them. But there was something remarkably peaceful about her presence. She was not interested in talking about herself anymore. She did not want sympathy. She did not want attention. Instead, she kept looking at your soulmate as though she had been waiting for this exact conversation. At first, your soulmate thought she wanted to talk about family. Maybe she wanted to remember old memories. Maybe she wanted to say something she had never said before. Maybe she simply needed someone beside her so she would not feel alone. But then the woman suddenly asked a question that made your soulmate freeze. Do you love someone? Your soulmate did not answer immediately. There was something about the question that felt strangely personal. They looked down, took a slow breath, and tried to change the subject. But the woman smiled faintly. Don't hide it, she whispered. I can see it in your face. Those words opened a door your soulmate had been trying desperately to keep closed. Because there was someone they had been thinking about, someone they had tried to push out of their mind, someone whose name could still change the entire atmosphere of a room without being spoken, someone who had become impossible to forget. That someone was you. Your soulmate finally admitted that there was a person they cared about deeply. They did not explain everything. They did not tell the whole story. They simply said that things were complicated. The woman became quiet. Then she looked directly at your soulmate and said something that your soulmate would remember for the rest of their life. Complicated does not mean impossible. Your soulmate stared at her. Those 4 words seemed simple, but they carried a weight that was difficult to explain, because they had been using complications as a reason to remain still. They had told themselves that the timing was wrong. They had told themselves that too much had happened. They had told themselves that maybe you had moved on. Maybe you no longer cared. Maybe you deserved someone easier to love. Maybe the distance, silence, misunderstandings, fear, pride, and uncertainty were signs that the connection was never meant to happen. But that woman seemed to see straight through all of those excuses. She asked your soulmate, "What are you afraid of?" Your soulmate did not answer, and somehow the silence answered for them. They were afraid of rejection, afraid of being vulnerable, afraid that you might not feel the same way, afraid of admitting how much you mattered, afraid that if they came toward you, they would have to confront everything they had spent so long avoiding. The woman reached for their hand. People spend too much time protecting themselves from heartbreak, she whispered, and not enough time protecting themselves from regret. Your soulmate looked away. Those words hit somewhere deep, because suddenly, they began thinking about every moment they had chosen silence when they could have spoken, every time they wanted to reach out but stopped. Every message they wrote but never sent, every time they remembered you and pretended they did not, every conversation where someone mentioned love and your soulmate became strangely quiet, Every night they promised themselves that tomorrow would be different, and then tomorrow became another day, and another, and another. The woman watched their expression change. "You already know who you're thinking about," she said. Your soulmate nodded. "Then why haven't you told them that?" Question remained unanswered. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then your soulmate finally said something they had probably never admitted out loud before. "I don't know if I deserve another chance." The woman closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, there was tenderness in her expression. "Maybe you don't need to decide whether you deserve another chance," she said. "Maybe you need to decide whether you are willing to become honest enough to ask for one." Your soulmate became emotional, because that was the truth they had been avoiding. They had been waiting for certainty. They had wanted some perfect sign that would guarantee everything would work out. They wanted to know that you would say yes before they ever risked saying what was in their heart. But life does not always give people that kind of guarantee. Sometimes a person has to choose honesty before knowing the outcome. The woman looked toward the window. Outside, the night was almost completely still. Then she whispered something that made your soulmate's heart stop for a moment. "I know that person." Your soulmate turned toward her. "What?" The woman smiled. "I know who you're talking about." Your soulmate could barely speak. "How?" She did not explain immediately. Instead, she looked at them with an expression that suggested she had been carrying a memory for a very long time. Then she said, "Your name." Your soulmate went completely still. Hearing your name from her lips changed the atmosphere instantly. It was not merely that she knew who you were, it was the way she spoke your name. As though it carried a story, as though there was something your soulmate had never understood. Your soulmate asked how she knew you. The woman told them that life had a strange way of connecting people. Years ago, she had crossed paths with you. It may have been a brief encounter. It may have been something you barely remembered. Perhaps you had offered a kindness without realizing its importance. Perhaps you had said something simple at a moment when she needed to hear it. Perhaps you had helped someone. Perhaps you had simply been yourself. But she remembered. And that was when she told your soulmate something that completely changed the way they saw you. You don't know how much good that person has done without taking credit for it. Your soulmate stared at her, because they had seen parts of you. They knew your personality. They knew your habits. They knew your strengths and weaknesses. But perhaps they had never understood the depth behind them. The woman explained that some people leave an impression without even realizing it. They walk into someone's life, say a few words, offer a little kindness, and continue on their way. They never know what happened afterward. They never know that someone remembered their kindness years later. They never know that their presence helped another person through a difficult season. They never know that something they considered insignificant became unforgettable to someone else. And she believed you were one of those people. Your soulmate listened carefully. Then the woman said something even more surprising. "You keep thinking you're afraid of losing them," she said. "But perhaps what you're really afraid of is discovering how much you already need to change." Your soulmate became silent again, because they knew she was right. Loving someone deeply is not always about chasing them. Sometimes it forces a person to confront themselves, their pride, their fear, their mistakes, their avoidance, their old habits, their inability to communicate, their tendency to disappear when emotions become overwhelming. Your soulmate began remembering moments when you needed honesty and they gave you silence. Moments when you deserved reassurance and they gave you uncertainty. Moments when you were probably wondering what they truly felt while they were struggling to admit it even to themselves. The woman whispered, "If you love them, don't make them spend the rest of their life guessing." Those words stayed in the room. Your soulmate looked down at their hands. They knew there was truth in what she was saying. And then, unexpectedly, the woman began talking about time, not in a frightening way, not with bitterness. She simply said that people often assume they have unlimited opportunities to say what matters. They assume there will always be another conversation, another weekend, another message, another chance to explain, another opportunity to apologize, another moment to say, "I love you." But life can change without warning. People can move, circumstances can shift, doors can close, and sometimes the words people thought they had plenty of time to say remain trapped inside them. She looked at your soulmate and said, "Don't let fear write the final sentence of your story." Your soulmate could not hold back their emotions anymore. They admitted that they had imagined a future with you. They admitted that they had wondered what it would be like to wake up knowing you were truly part of their life. They admitted that sometimes they pictured ordinary things. Not dramatic moments, not perfect movie scenes, just ordinary mornings, conversations, laughter, walking together, sitting quietly in the same room, having someone who knew their heart and still chose to stay. And then they admitted the part they were most ashamed of. They had been afraid that you might eventually stop waiting. The woman looked at them carefully. "Then stop asking whether they will wait," she whispered. "Ask yourself what you are doing to give them a reason to believe." That sentence changed something, because your soulmate realized that love cannot survive forever on potential. It needs action, it needs honesty, it needs courage, it needs two people willing to communicate instead of making assumptions. The woman then asked your soulmate to make her a promise. "Promise me you won't leave important words unsaid simply because you're afraid of the answer." Your soulmate hesitated. Then they promised. But the woman was not finished. She said, "And promise me something else." "What?" "When you speak to them, don't tell them what they want to hear. Tell them the truth." Your soulmate nodded. The woman smiled. "That's all anyone really wants." And then she closed her eyes for a while. Your soulmate remained beside her. They did not leave. They simply sat there, thinking about you, thinking about how strange life could be, how someone could become so important without either person realizing how deeply the connection had grown. They thought about the first time they noticed something different about you, the first conversation, the first moment they felt drawn toward you, the first time they realized your absence bothered them more than it should, the first time they became jealous but refused to admit it, the first time they wondered whether you felt the same, and then they remembered the moments when they pushed you away. Maybe they were afraid. Maybe they were confused. Maybe they were dealing with circumstances they never explained. Maybe they thought distancing themselves would make everything easier. Instead, The distance only made them realize how much they missed you. The woman eventually opened her eyes again. She looked at your soulmate and whispered one final thought about you. That person does not need someone who promises perfection. Your soulmate listened. They need someone who is willing to be real. There was a pause. Tell them the truth. Even if your voice shakes, your soulmate nodded. Then came the sentence that your soulmate would never forget. Some people come into our lives to teach us what love feels like. Others come into our lives and teach us what courage feels like. She looked toward your soulmate. Perhaps this person is asking you to learn both. Your soulmate began crying quietly, not because the moment was dramatic, not because they wanted sympathy, but because they finally understood something. They had spent so much time wondering whether you were meant to stay in their life that they had forgotten to ask what they were supposed to become in order to love you properly. That night became a turning point, not because some magical promise was made, not because the future suddenly became guaranteed, but because your soulmate finally stopped running from the truth inside their own heart. They realized they could not control what you would choose. They could not force you to forgive. They could not demand another chance. They could not erase every mistake, but they could become honest. They could apologize. They could communicate. They could stop hiding behind pride. They could finally tell you what they had been too afraid to say. Before the night ended, your soulmate looked at the woman one more time. She seemed peaceful, and your soulmate whispered, "What should I tell them?" The woman smiled. Then she said something so simple that it almost sounded ordinary. "Tell them they mattered." Your soulmate waited. "Tell them they mattered when you were silent." A pause. "Tell them they mattered when you were distant." Another pause. "Tell them they mattered even when you acted like they didn't." Your soulmate lowered their head, and then she whispered the words that would become the deepest message of the entire night. "Tell them you are sorry they ever had to wonder." Your soulmate knew exactly what she meant, because perhaps you had wondered. Maybe you had asked yourself why they changed. Maybe you wondered whether you imagined the connection. Maybe you questioned whether their feelings were ever genuine. Maybe you wondered why someone who seemed so close could suddenly become so distant. Maybe you blamed yourself. Maybe you thought you were not enough. But the truth your soulmate finally understood was that your worth had never been the problem. Their fear had been the problem. Their confusion had been the problem. Their inability to communicate had been the problem. Their unfinished emotional battles had been the problem. And they knew they could no longer make you carry the weight of questions they were responsible for answering. The woman reached for their hand once more. "Go in peace," she whispered. Your soulmate nodded. "And when you see them," your soulmate waited. "What do I say first?" The woman smiled. "Start with the truth. And perhaps that is what makes this story so powerful. Not the idea that someone else can magically predict your future. Not the promise that everything will automatically work out, but the realization that sometimes one honest conversation can change the direction of two lives. Your soulmate left that room carrying something they had not carried when they entered. Courage. They were still afraid, but they were no longer willing to let fear make every decision. And somewhere in the quiet hours of the night, your soulmate thought about you again. They wondered whether you were awake. They wondered whether you were thinking about them. They wondered what would happen if they finally told you everything, and for the first time, they did not immediately imagine the worst. They imagined honesty. They imagined saying your name. They imagined telling you that they had missed you. They imagined admitting that they cared. They imagined apologizing for the confusion. They imagined asking whether there was still a door open between you. And perhaps the most important thing they understood was this. They could not promise you a perfect future, but they could promise to stop pretending they did not care. They could stop hiding. They could stop making you decode silence. They could stop expecting time to solve what only honesty could solve. The woman may have believed in signs. Your soulmate may believe in destiny. You may interpret the night differently. But the heart of the message remains human and simple. If someone matters to you, let them know. If you have made a mistake, take responsibility. If you are afraid, admit that you are afraid. If you love someone, do not make them spend forever wondering whether they were ever loved. And if you are the person waiting on the other side of this story, remember something important. You do not have to chase anyone. You do not have to beg someone to recognize your value. You do not have to convince someone to choose you. You deserve honesty. You deserve respect. You deserve communication. And if your soulmate truly wants another chance, the responsibility is not yours to drag them toward you. They must walk toward you too. That is what changed last night. Your soulmate finally understood that love is not only a feeling hidden inside the heart. Love becomes meaningful when it becomes a choice to communicate, a choice to be accountable, a choice to show up, a choice to stop running, a choice to speak before another opportunity disappears. And somewhere beneath all the fear, your soulmate knew exactly what they wanted to say to you. I never stopped caring. I was scared. I handled things badly. I should have told you sooner. You deserved clarity. And if there is still a place for me in your life, I want to earn it honestly. Maybe those words will come soon. Maybe the conversation will begin unexpectedly. Maybe it will start with something ordinary, a simple message, a familiar name appearing on your screen, a question that seems harmless, a conversation that slowly becomes deeper. You may not know how the story ends. Your soulmate may not know either. But last night, something inside them changed. They realized that silence was no longer protecting their heart. It was only keeping the truth from the person who deserved to hear it. And when they finally walked away from that room, they carried the memory of the woman's final advice with them. Don't leave the important words unsaid. So if you are wondering why this story feels so emotional, perhaps it is because the deepest part of it is not really about prediction. It is about recognition. It is about the moment someone finally realizes what another person means to them. It is about the courage to stop hiding behind circumstances. It is about understanding that love should never require you to abandon yourself while waiting for someone else to become ready. And it is about remembering that sometimes the greatest turning point is not when someone comes running back. Sometimes it is when you finally stop waiting for proof of your worth and begin living as though you already know it. Your soulmate may have a decision to make. You may have one too. And perhaps the most beautiful ending is not knowing exactly what tomorrow will bring. Perhaps it is knowing that whatever happens next, You are no longer required to live inside uncertainty. If they return, let their actions speak. If they apologize, listen without abandoning your boundaries. If they confess their feelings, remember that words matter most when actions follow. And if they never find the courage to speak, let that silence be their responsibility, not yours, because the woman in that quiet room gave your soulmate something far more valuable than a prediction. She gave them perspective. She reminded them that time is precious, that love should not be hidden behind pride, that regret often grows where honesty was avoided, and that some people become unforgettable not because they were perfect, but because they touched the heart in a way that changed something forever. Your soulmate left that night knowing one thing with absolute clarity: they needed to tell you the truth, not because the universe demanded it, not because a sign guaranteed an outcome, but because you deserved to know what was real inside their heart. And now the question is no longer whether they care, the question is whether they will have the courage to show it, because somewhere between the silence of last night and the beginning of tomorrow, your soulmate made